Hey y'all, I'm Carolina Tony. Today the road brings me to Edenton, Georgia, and I am standing in front of the Uncle Remus Museum. Now, I have been here before and did a video, but today I'm going to give you a little more in-depth history lesson about the Uncle Remus stories, who they were written by, why they were written, why they're so famous. A lot of folks don't have a clue, but I'm going to tell you the truth. And we'll get started right after this station identification. Joel Chandler Harris. He was born in Edenton on December the 9th, 1848. In 1862, when young Joel was just 14 years old, he answered an ad in the newspaper for a typesetter. Joel and his mother lived in downtown Edenton. They didn't have very much money, but they stayed in a little cottage behind one of the larger houses in downtown. 114 Harris Street. This is known as the Brunson Mansion, or later the Reed Mansion. This is where Joel Chandler Harris, his mother and grandmother, lived in a little two-room house behind the house. It was on this spot where once a two-room house stood. In 1883, Harris, his mother and grandmother moved here. It was in the backyard of the Andrew Reed Mansion. The women did sewing for the large Reed family. Joel's mother, a devout Methodist, taught him to read and write using the Bible as his first text. Young Joel attended the Edenton Male Academy, paid for by the County Poor School Fund. And just for a point of history, Chandler Harris, Joel Chandler Harris, him and his family were very poor and owned no slaves. The Blackwell Furniture Company pretty much takes up the whole block, but it once was the home of a tavern where Joel Chandler Harris was born, as well as a Masonic Lodge right up those stairs. Mr. Harris went to work for Joseph Sidney Turner at a plantation about 9 miles outside of Edenton called Turnworld. Because Turnworld was 9 miles outside of town and the transportation was by a horse and buggy or walking, it just made sense for young Mr. Harris to stay on the plantation. And he did in a little cottage back behind the main plantation house. There's a magnolia flower, and if you've never smelled the sweet smell of magnolia, you don't know what you're missing. It was there on the plantation that young Mr. Harris would hear the story from the slaves that lived and worked there. And these stories were told by mouth to ear to their children. No different than today. Children didn't want to hear boring stories. They wanted to hear something entertaining. But the slaves themselves brought these stories from Africa, and they would tell them as was told to them. And a lot of times the stories would involve animals, because, listen, don't you think children would rather hear about a little fuzzy bunny rabbit or a sly old fox Mr. Harris worked on the plantation till after the Civil War. When the times on the plantation grew hard, he was forced to leave. He went to several other places and worked in newspapers, Savannah, but he eventually wound up writing for a paper in his mid-30s in Atlanta, Georgia. After taking over a column by a writer that had left the newspaper in Atlanta, Mr. Harris remarked that it was a pretty boring column that the man had, and it was then that he remembered the stories as told to him by the slaves. And this is where the Uncle Remus stories were created. Mr. Harris had remembered the stories told to him by the slaves in his youth, and though we really don't know for sure if there was a real Uncle Remus, later in life, when Mr. Harris had grandchildren, he did have a servant at his house. His name was Remus, so perhaps that's where the Remus came from. It wasn't until the 1880s that the Uncle Remus stories hit the newspapers. Soon after, the first book was created around 1880. One of the most widely known stories is Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox. Brer Rabbit, born and bred in the briar patch, he survives forever by his wit, his courage, and his cunning. If you hadn't seen the movie, it's just awesome. The actor that played old Uncle Remus in the Song of the South, it is hard to believe that he was in his 40s and he died not long after the movie was made. I remember in the movie he said, "This is going to be a zippity-doo-dah day." And I love how he spoke. You remember that song, don't you? Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay, my oh my, what a wonderful day. Plenty of sunshine heading my way. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay. Mr. Harris decided to write the newspaper article and later the book in the dialect where he first heard them. And that would have been the dialect of the slaves themselves. There are a lot of these chainsaw carved animals all around the museum. By the way, this museum was made from 2 slave cabins that were torn down. There's Brer Rabbit over there. At one time, they tell me that this is where the Tar Baby sat. Now, folks, when they hear the word Tar Baby, they get bent all out of shape, and immediately, as everything has become today, they start hollering races, races, races. The Tar Baby is a story that they told that the sly fox, Brer Fox, coated a baby made to look like a person in tar to catch the rabbit, because the rabbit was like a wise guy, thinking he could be lazy and get away with doing things. So the fox made the Tar Baby to catch the sly fox. Again, it was a story. It was a useful story. When things get sticky, if you're wise enough, some things can get stuck. It's truth, it's factual, everything inside is factual. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay. What a wonderful feeling, feeling this way. Well, that is going to do it for our trip to the Uncle Remus Museum in Edenton, Georgia. I hope this video will clear some things up for some folks. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give me a big old thumbs up. Be sure to share this video with your family and friends. But until next time, y'all have a good day.